Hey folks, Derek here with another Man Cave review, taking a look again at a new lure that I've fallen in love with, which is the Kamooki SmartFish. Going to talk for a second about my plan of attack for some Simcoe lake trout later this week. Heading up, I'm going to be fishing in 80, 90 feet of water, somewhere in the west side of Thor Island, looking for those good-sized lake trout in 90 feet of water or so on Simcoe. And the way that I plan to use this bait, this is a lipless rattling crankbait. This is an open water bait that has been taken advantage of by the walleye lake trout guys for ice fishing. And I have had some excellent success. If you take a look at their website, you'll see some of that success there with other guys with lake trout. And the strategy with this bait is to obviously just let it drop to base in 80 or 90 feet of water. And because it has a really strong ceramic rattle in it, it makes an outstanding calling bait. So if you're not marking fish, you can try to appeal to those fish by ripping this in long 3 to 4 foot sweeps and letting it settle to base on semi-slack line. Rip it up again 3 to 4 feet and let it settle down on semi-slack line. And the wonderful thing about this bait is that when it does settle, unlike any other lipless rattling crankbait or blade bait out there, instead of settling on its side on base and simply lying flat, this bait actually maintains its vertical position on this zinc keel as a feeding minnow. So when you rip this up and you drop it on semi-slack, it'll sit like this on base. And then you can twitch it a few times, like a feeding minnow would look as it's looking for scud or freshwater shrimp or bloodworm in that sediment. So again, the first strategy with these lakers is to use it as a calling bait. Rip it up 3 to 4 feet, let it settle to base. Rip it up 3 to 4 feet, let it settle to base. Pound that sediment. Bring up a stir of mud or sand, perhaps even disturb some bloodworm or some freshwater shrimp, and bring those lake trout in with that bead and that pounding on base to bring up that cloud. Obviously, when you're marking fish, you've got to change your tactics. At that point, you want to keep that bait in that cloud of dust lake trout like to feed directly on bottom. So you keep that bait in that cloud. You're twitching up in 3 to 4 inch increments and then letting it pound back to base, making that lake trout think that this is a bait that's simply feeding off the bottom. And with that, if that lake trout is interested in that presentation, they will go right in the mud after it. I haven't found that it's often necessary to bring that bait up and out of that cloud. Really, I just keep that right on base, pounding on base, either like a feeding minnow or a 4-inch minnow that has decided that it's got a predator that's looking for it, is trying to bury itself in that mud. And either way, often the lake trout will go in right after it. The second strategy, obviously, for those lake trout, if they don't hit on the feeding minnow presentation right on base, after you've brought them in on as a calling bait, the second strategy is to literally reel this bait in and rip this bait up as quickly as you can. Lake trout love nothing more than to chase baits hard and fast, straight up through the water column, grab them and haul them back down. It is a standard jigging practice for lake trout. One that a lot of guys that dead stick for lake trout and use natural bait for lake trout simply can't take advantage of. But this SmartFish, after you've pounded that mud or that silt, if it's not going to hit, an excellent strategy is simply to reel like Hades for the surface as fast as you possibly can. And if you're watching your sonar, you'll often see that lake trout. You'll see your lure. You'll see that lake trout take off vertical after your bait. Do not pause. Do not rest. Reel as quickly as you can on those lures. Certainly don't use a 1-to-1 for this application. Use a spinning reel with a better speed ratio than 1-to-1. Reel as fast as you can, and that bait will be acting as a rattle bait all the way up through 80, 90 feet of water. Do not stop until you see that lure beneath the hut. And at that point, if the fish is peeled off, you can drop it back to base again. You do need to remember as well with the Kamooki SmartFish that this doesn't have the drop of a blade bait or a lipless rattling crankbait, that 3 to 4 foot per second bang thud. This bait has the drop of a heavy tube jig. It has that same slow descent that a tube jig would give you. So, the strategy again with the Kamooki SmartFish, and again my two favorite patterns going after lake trout are the natural shad, which has a bit of a purple back, you can see there, and then of course the 4-inch glow, which I just dropped. The 4-inch glow will work beautifully in low light applications for lake trout as well. But I mean, my daytime favorite is the natural shad. So drop it into mud, use it as a calling bait, 3 to 4 foot sweeps, let it pound mud, raise that silt. If you're marking Lakers and they go after it, that's fantastic. If you're marking Lakers that are picking, they don't want to, reel as fast as you can for the surface and bring that bait up as quickly as humanly possible, and you will put yourself on fish. I'm looking forward to the trip, and I'll post some results when I've used it on the ice. Again, play safe on the ice. It's late January at this point, so we've got pretty stable ice, and good luck on the ice.